This is the spring semester series of the University of Arizona Career Prep seminars. And today we have Dr. Julio Betancourt. I hope I said that right. And he will be discussing, well, he's currently at the he is a Scientist Emeritus with the US Geological Survey and an Adjunct Professor at the U of A. And he's going to be leading us through his career. So I'll give you the floor.
Thanks, Kayla, and thanks to Marie and Shauna and others for inviting me to give this talk. And welcome to my life. This is going to be a little traipse through my probably the last 70 years. Things happen fast, though. Don't get worried. So for most of my career, I was a senior scientist and research hydrologist in the National Research Program of the Water Mission Area of the US Geological Survey. And I was either based in either two places. I was either based at the University of Arizona, either at the Desert Lab on Tumamoc Hill, just west of the campus, or I was based at the U.S. National Center in Reston, Virginia. So I spent about 30 something years in Tucson, and then I spent the last 8 years in Reston, Virginia, just on the outskirts of DC. So that's my position now, is that I'm a Scientist Emeritus, although I switched out of the Water Mission Area into something called the Science and Decision Center in the Northeastern region. And I'm a Scientist Emeritus, but I'm actually really flunking retirement badly, as you might see during the talk. So let me back up a second and go right to the very beginning. That's me on the left, and my sister and my brother. The little sister, the fourth sister, hadn't been born yet. And this is in Havana, Cuba. So I was born and raised in Cuba up until I was 9.5 years old. And then the Cuban Revolution happened. My uncle took over the Washington Embassy in Castro's behalf and then defected. And so we had to leave in a hurry in October of 1960 and moved to Dallas, Texas, where I did the rest of my growing up. So I wanted to show you an abridged stratigraphy of my life here, starting when I emigrated to the US because of Castro and the Cuban Revolution. We moved to Dallas, my family moved to Dallas, and when I was in the 4th grade. It's a good time for change because you're soaking everything up. So I went to elementary school, and then I went to high school in Dallas, graduated in 1969. And then kind of jumped around a couple of universities, ended up at the U of A and got my master's and Ph.D. at the U of A. And during that time, actually, as I was doing my master and Ph.D., I got married and had 3 kids myself, who are all adults now, ranging from 31 years old to 39 years old. And so, as Kayla said, I'm an adjunct professor at the U of A in 3 different colleges. I've been a USGS scientist since 1987. And actually, I worked for the USGS as a student from 1981 to 1987. And I've done lots of different things. I've done lots of different kinds of science, lots of interdisciplinary science, but I've also done some community organizing. I started a regional NGO in southern Arizona to address bufflegrass invasion. And I also co-founded a national monitoring network, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Again, I moved to the National Center in 2013 and then retired in 2018. So, here's the progression in my education, I went to a Jesuit college preparatory in Dallas. And then when I graduated, I spent a semester at the University of, actually a year at the University of North Texas, which used to be North Texas State University in Denton, Texas, just north of Dallas. And then moved to the University of Texas at Austin, where I got my undergraduate and graduate degrees in anthropology with a minor in geography. I spent the last year of my undergraduate years at Catholic University in Lima, Peru, and it was a blast and a real formative experience. And if you haven't done that yet, traveled abroad and done that, it's a real formative experience for anybody who does this. And I could tell story upon story and probably write novels about it. Then I spent 4 years kicking around archaeology in the Southwest and also in Central America and places like Belize, digging sites and doing surveys. And then I decided I needed to go to graduate school, and I did that at the University of New Mexico, where I lasted about a semester before I realized that's not what I wanted to do. And so I wrote a proposal at the time, and somebody at the University of Arizona was really interested in it and invited me to make the switch and transfer. And then I got my master's degree and my Ph.D. from the University of Arizona with a minor in geosciences and with a major in geosciences and a minor in ecology and evolution. So I've done sometimes when you look at people's CV, it looks linear, right? I mean, it looks like, here are the positions that they've occupied, here are the degrees, the positions they've occupied, it all looks linear, but there's a lot of twists and turns. The Earth is a spinning ball of random gases and fuels and fluids. And so there's a lot of nudging going on and a lot of serendipity. So I've done lots of different things, but most of my career has been at USGS, and I've had a couple of different adjunct positions at Arizona, Boise State, and most recently at the Earth System Science Interdisciplinary Center at the University of Maryland. So I've had a very lucky career in that when I was in graduate school, nobody discouraged me from my attention deficit disorder. And so I decided myself that because of global change, I needed to be broadly trained, and I did that. And I'm not bragging here about all the awards, but notice that these awards are coming from different professional societies and in different but related fields. And I think that's something that I'm really proud of, is the recognition of my work, across different professional societies with, some high-level awards, and also some awards from the Department of the Interior, which has USGS is under, and also the White House. So now I want to switch a little bit to my research, and I don't want to get into a lot of details. So, and I'm gonna skip over a lot of stuff. This is in the background, the desert laboratory on Tumamoc Hill with the Catalinas, and in the background in Tucson in the middle. And I spent, again, about 30 years there. So I mostly work on environmental change, baselines and processes at different timescales from seasonal to millennial. And so I conduct synoptic, meaning large-scale empirical historical studies to show how climate influences terrestrial ecosystems at scales that are critical for understanding natural processes and detecting and forecasting spatial temporal variability and trends, and for managing resources and hazards. So I've done a lot of different things, but I just want to kind of touch on a few of these things. I did a lot of paleoecology in arid parts of both North and South America. I'll touch on that briefly. I spent a lot of time doing that, many decades, and I've written many papers about it. And it's been a lot of fun, and I'm still writing papers about it and mining the records that I produced, both physical and digital. I also have worked on invasive species management, primarily focused on southern Arizona and the bufflegrass issue, and started, you know, a nonprofit organization with others that was, you know, very, very successful. And the activities are still going on, and maybe you hear about them in the newspapers or on television. The drivers and consequences of meteorological and ecological drought. I'm not going to talk much about that. I'm going to focus instead on the hydroclimatology of seasonal transitions and phenology. Phenology is the study of life events in the annual life cycle of plants and animals. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and then sort of finish up and talk about integrated science, anticipatory science, in particular ecological forecasting. So I'll start off with the work that I did in paleoecology, which is based on deposits in North America. It's based on deposits made by pack rats in caves and rock crevices and rock shelters throughout the North American deserts. And these animals collect a lot of material within 50 yards away, and then they bring it into the rock shelter. They urinate on it. As the urine crystallizes, as it evaporates, it crystallizes. It holds all this material together that's been obtained from within 50 meters. And that becomes a real solid mass that perseveres for tens of thousands of years, basically for radiocarbon time, the last 40,000 years. The picture there on the left is of a former University of Arizona undergraduate, Erin Gleason, that used to work in my lab. And she's sitting there hammering on a midden that's around 42,000 years old at City of Rocks National Reserve in south central Idaho. So we've done this all over the place. I'm going to show you a histogram through time of the number of these deposits that we've collected and dated and analyzed that almost number 2,000. And so we've collected a lot of these deposits. It's really how we've reconstructed vegetation over the last 50,000 years in the North American deserts, because there's not much other way, since we don't have bodies of water and lake sedimentation where we can core and then analyze the pollens. So, and the plant parts look like duff on the forest floor. They're exquisitely preserved, so much so that we can identify things to species and subspecies, and we can actually pull ancient DNA from it. We can do morphological, geochemical, and genetic studies with this material. Starting in the mid 1990s, I started doing this in South America as well, not with pack rats, but with animals that had very similar habits. This is a leaf-eared mouse, but there are a couple of other animals in South America that produce these deposits. And there's a midden just chock full of steppe grasses in what is now close to absolute desert, where it doesn't rain and there's no, there aren't very many vascular plants. And in fact, you get into areas where it never rains, except once every few decades, and there are absolutely no plants at all. And so we've done a lot of work in Bolivia, Peru, Argentina, and Chile to develop a very similar record of middens dated and analyzed in South America. And I now have these, not only these digital files of all the work that we've done on this material, but we also have the physical archives, one which resides at the Laboratory of Tree Ring Research at the University of Arizona, and the other one resides in my former student's university, which is Catholic University in Lima, Chile, in Santiago, Chile. It was clear when I was working on Tumamoc Hill that bufflegrass was going to be a problem. And we knew that starting back in the 1980s, but it really kicked up a notch during the 1990s and certainly into the 2000s. And I was pulled into the fray in 2004 when people from scientists and other people from the community asked me to pitch in and try to do a demonstration project on Tumamoc Hill. And the short of it is that in 2008, we ended up starting a nonprofit that was a partnership across the public and private sector. And it was entrusted with educating, planning, and coordinating mitigation of bufflegrass invasion and its impacts across multiple jurisdictions. This is a grass that is extremely flammable. It burns twice as hot as any of our native grasses and any of our other exotic grasses. And it is, on its way to transforming the Sonoran Desert. And because of its flammability, it not only endangers bushes and berries, but it also, creates a fire risk in urban and suburban areas. So we just recently wrote a paper and submitted a paper on the relationship, the interaction of the Bighorn Fire that occurred this past summer in Tucson and in the Catalinas and bufflegrass, which we've mapped out over the years. And so we were watching the edge of the fire come down the foothills, and I heard Kayla talking before the introduction about the evacuation in her neighborhood. In my old neighborhood was one of the ones evacuated. I wasn't living there anymore. But we ended up writing a paper with Ben Wilder, who's now the director, was a former undergraduate of mine, but is now the director of the Desert Lab. And I think it's a very interesting study because it really shows kind of the wave of the future as bufflegrass stands densify in the Catalina foothills and these fires sweep downhill and they can also go uphill. So they can start in the bufflegrass and go uphill, or they can start up in the forest and go downhill. So another thing that I've done is not only become involved, but actually led a community of practice that's focused on variations and trends in seasonal timing in surficial processes, be it water or hydrology or vegetation dynamics at local to global scales and at many time scales. Seasonal timing is hugely important in the biosphere. This is a figure that I adapted from a very famous textbook that's just been updated by Gordy Bonin called Ecological Climatology. And it's a wonderful textbook. So what ended up happening is that I actually have been involved throughout my career in exercises to identify grand challenges in the science. And I ran a workshop in Tucson at the behest of the National Science Foundation and something called the National Ecological Observatory Network to figure out how a $500 million national network might address the ecological impacts of climate change. And the effort at the time was not mature enough, but one of the recommendations we made in the report is to start a national phenology network, meaning a large-scale network of repeated integrated plant and animal phenological observations and the tools to analyze them at local to national scale. And I want to stop now and say that while physical scientists, climatologists and hydrologists have made investment in monitoring and creating spatial temporally dynamic data that's wall to wall at the continental scale, ecologists have failed to do so, except in a couple of cases including birds, just simply because there are so many citizen science that like to observe birds, that big databases have been created at the national scale. And I'll talk about that in a second some more. So what ended up happening is I got some money from NSF, teamed up with a guy at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Mark Schwartz, and we helped start a national phenology network. We cited the national office at the University of Arizona. The university gave us free space and half a position, and then I talked the U.S. Geological Survey into providing base table funding and an executive director. And that's the crew that has done all this work that now dates back when we opened the office in 2007. So we have thousands of observers making, I think it's up to about 20 million observations now, spanning from 2007 to the present. So the fun thing about it now is that we're developing these next generation continental scale phenological models that allow you to sort of see what's going on, for example, with spring onset at the continental scale. And so what you're looking at from our website, which is usanpn.org, I just actually pulled this up a couple of days ago, and what you're looking at is the anomalies of a spring first leaf index across the continent. So if it's red, it means that it's occurring earlier than normal. And if it's blue, it's that it's occurring later. And so at a glance, almost immediately, you can track what's going on at the continental scale over the coterminous US. Kind of fun. We've also done all sorts of things. We've averaged the spring index that we've developed. We've averaged it across the country. And you can see the time series on the right, just to get an idea of what the trends might be relative to not just climate variability, but global warming, climate change. And what we see is actually at the continental scale, this step change right around 1984. And you see this step change in just about everything that has to do with spring temperatures from the Arctic to the Antarctic. And this is now on people's radar, but our data is contributing quite a bit to it. Let me put it in a little bit of context. So a PhD student named Greg Peterson at the University of Arizona, I was on his committee along with a few other people. Connie Woodhouse was also on Greg's committee. And he published a paper in Science based on a reconstruction of snowpack accumulation in the Rocky Mountains based on 66 tree ring chronologies and spanning the last 800 years. And so in blue, you have the time series. It's a decadal to multi-decadal time series. In blue, you have the time series for the Northern Rockies. And in red, you have the time series for the Southern Rockies. And you can see this anti-phase pattern. When one is up, the other one is down. This is called the climatic dipole, and it's driven primarily by snow accumulation responses to Pacific decadal variability, to Eastern Pacific decadal variability. And so it's when one is up, one is down. But then notice that changes right around, and that change at the end of that time series is actually 1984, when both the Northern and the Southern Rockies, the snow accumulation is significantly reduced in area, probably by about 20%. And that's a big number given the fact, that there's 12 Western states drawing water from the Colorado, and it represents about 70% of the domestic water supply in the West. And the reason for that is that the reason for that unusual snowpack decline in both the North and the South is actually now snowpack accumulation starting to respond mostly to springtime warming and a lot less to Pacific decadal variability. So I'm kind of doing this to show you how wild science can be, where it can just, take twists and turns and lead you to really incredible places. So in 2015, we wrote a paper in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And it was a group that I sort of put together, a climate dynamicist, a landscape ecologist, myself, and an ornithologist, also landscape ecologist, that was about my age. And what it entailed was actually something that I've been thinking about for a long time, is that there are these eruptions of songbirds that eat seed and breed in the boreal forest. And these birds every once in a while take off and migrate over the whole continent rather than staying in the boreal forest. And there's a animation down at the bottom that you can sort of watch and see the birds accumulating, the density of birds accumulating in different patterns across the country. And the reason for that is that it's actually being driven by climate. And because we have this kind of data from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in a program called Project Feeder Watch, we can analyze those data as if they were climatic data. And it turns out that what's driving these boreal bird eruptions is actually climatic influences on conifer masting, the production of massive seed crops across the boreal forest, with an antiphase between eastern and western Canada. And so the birds reproduce like crazy when they see the cone crop developing, but then the trees spin out of carbohydrates, and the next year is slim picking. So this is a boom bust economy, and it's got these north and south and east and west dipoles that are driven by large scale atmospheric circulation. So these dipoles are now becoming really interesting because we have this kind of data that ecologists have been investing a lot of time monitoring. So that study was done on this bird that shows up on the cover of Trends in Ecology and Evolution. We just written another paper where we've explored this in both the marine and terrestrial realm globally. So we've explored how climatic dipoles, these areas of juxtaposed climate variability or antiphase climate variability across the globe, drive a lot of plant and animal dynamics. So again, this takes us to a different place, because now the question is how much of these patterns are actually predictable. So this is a paper in 2018 in Proceedings of the National Academy of Science by a group of us, a working group that met at the Powell Center, which is a USGS facility in Fort Collins. And this has now moved fairly quickly. And it's with the recognition that given all these changes that are happening, the need to start forecasting is now, and the time for making ecology more predictive is here. And we're going to learn by doing, we're going to learn the fastest by doing this to drive the science forward. And a former PhD student at the University of Arizona that I've worked with quite a bit, Toby Alt, who's now at Cornell, and his students are now pulling this off. So they're actually using our spring onset indices, and they're actually forecasting it, 10 to 60 days in advance. This is the most recent forecast, and these are the anomalies for that forecast, telling you whether the spring is going to be early, if it's red, or if it's going to be late, if it's in the blue. or not changing very much if it's just in the white. So one of the things that I wanted to say, I'm kind of done talking about the science, and now I'm going to switch to talking about my training and how I approached it. And maybe that's how you should approach it too, although with different hexagons and different ideas. But when I went to do my graduate work, I really wanted to work on global change. So I started kind of piling on courses and training in different fields, you know, from quaternary science and geomorphology, climatology, hydrology, paleoecology. So I was training myself in these fields because my real interest was working the seams between disciplines. And there were a lot of people that were discouraging me from doing that. You know, and you've probably heard this before, when you do science and you're a graduate student, people are trying to get you to focus and become an expert in one thing and do empirical work, lab work, and then modeling to solve big questions, but primarily in one, excuse me, in one system. So looking back, what would I do if I had it all over to do again? And I think what I'd do is I would spend a lot more time than I did learning statistics, you know, particularly things like time series analysis. I would also learn a lot more computer science than I had time for at the time, going to graduate school and raising a family. And I would do a lot more GIS and remote sensing, you know, really tool up with spatial analytical skills. And I would also, believe it or not, I would learn project management, which is not something that I learned when I was in graduate school. I would also probably spend a lot more time taking courses in geochemistry. I sort of had the little geochemistry that I know, I kind of had to learn on the fly, you know, after I got out of school. Another one is fluvial dynamics, limnology and oceanography, and believe it or not, molecular biology and genetics, because I have ended up actually publishing papers in it, and sometimes I realize that I'm overextended. So, you know, you probably should think of your career in the future, particularly if you're, you know, if you're going to become a research scientist, but if you're going to become anything, of trying to anticipate what those gaps are while you're in school, and trying to work towards them so you don't have to make them up later. The other thing I wanted to mention that's important in thinking about your careers is mentoring. And, you know, I'm not saying pick your mentors wisely, because it doesn't really work that way. It's pretty serendipitous, and it's, you know, you make decisions, and then, you know, there may be mentors around that you know, you can rely on. And it's unbelievable where mentors can actually come from. I've been hugely fortunate to have incredible mentors my whole career. And then I've been lucky enough to be a mentor, you know, not only just to graduate students and undergraduate students and postdocs, but also early career scientists and mid-career scientists. And so I've learned quite a bit about it. And so some messages to take away from mentoring is that mentors spark enthusiasm. They can introduce useful tools, but they've got to leave room for discovery. That's actually critical. They can highlight good areas to roam, but they're not going to prescribe. They're not going to prescribe every step. Let's see, I'm having trouble here. Oh, there we go. So, you know, the other thing about mentoring that I'll mention is that, you know, everybody's got to carve your own path. And sometimes you have to ignore advice. In other words, don't take every piece of advice you get from mentors or anybody else, seriously, you have to make up your mind. And I could tell you lots of stories from very prominent scientists that I've come to know, young scientists, who are giving a high visibility talk on something that's just phenomenal. And they had gotten advice not to do that particular thing. And, they barreled through nonetheless. Early on, I had mentors that held a mirror to me and told me who I was. That was really critical because I actually, when I was younger, didn't think much of myself. And when I went to South America and I spent a year in Peru, I was mentored by a woman, archaeologist named Josefina Ramos de Cox, in 1972, 73. And she actually passed away from a heart attack the following year. She was very young, like 47. And I remember one time in the museum that she ran, she pulled me aside and she said, "You don't know who you are." And she proceeded to tell me who I was. And it turned out it was exactly who I was. And I just was not realizing it. And it made all the difference in the world. So you have to kind of pay attention every once in a while. Somebody's going to have a heart to heart with you, and you have to make sure that you're listening, particularly when it, entails, something as profound as who you are. I've also had mentors that taught me, like Jeff Dean, who I worked for at the Laboratory of Tree Ring Research in 1979, 1980. Great archaeologist and tree ring scientist. He taught me to be grumpily skeptical, and he also taught me to be meticulous. Tom Van Deventer, who taught me the pack rat midden methods and approaches, he taught me to be a good natural historian, and in fact encouraged me to take classes like systematic botany and mammalogy, and when I was in graduate school. And I'm forever grateful because it permeates all, everything in my life. Every time I go outside, I know who everybody is, and I'm talking about plants and animals. And it's delightful. It's not just, it's not just good for my science, but it's also good for my just personal well-being. Vic Baker and Jim Brown, who were on my PhD committee, taught me to actually think big. And, Vic taught me to pull out all the stops when you're giving a talk. And Jim is such a big thinker. And he also taught me humility. I remember one time when I took biogeography from Jim, I stopped him midway through the class when he was up on the board. And I said, "Jim, I think you've got the numerator and the denominator completely upside down." And he turned around and he goes, "Julio, my God, you're totally right. Thanks a lot for pointing that out." And just went back, erased the board, turned it around, and off we went. Just a brilliant guy, but hugely humble. Vance Haynes, who's a tremendous alluvial stratigrapher and geoarchaeologist. Going out in the field with him was just a joy, and I learned how to take notes in the field from Vance. Ray Turner, who was actually my boss when I was a graduate student at USGS, who really taught me to be, a better person. And he actually taught me the importance of, monitoring at larger spatial scales. That's where I actually learned that. And then Paul Martin, whom I was just also really fond of, who taught me courage. He's a guy, an incredible ecologist and geoscientist, who had polio in his early 20s, but yet would manage to still, with his disability, drag himself with joy through the field. So I had great mentors. So one of the things that I would recommend to you is to discover these mentoring programs that are offered to students and early career scientists by many professional societies. The American Geophysical Union is doing a fantastic job of this. And this is kind of a decision tree on the right there, which allows you to kind of explore what mentoring program at AGU is right for you. And it's got a few really good mentoring programs. I've been part of one of them, helped start one of them, called the AGU Mentoring Network, which is an initiative of the College of Fellows at AGU that mentors early career scientists, people who are transitioning from their PhDs or postdocs into professional positions. So Mentoring 365 is this virtual mentoring program to try to facilitate the exchange of knowledge and expertise, skills, insights, and experience through collaborative learning. So the program provides mentors and mentees with structured relationship building tools to develop and accomplish career goals. And then there's another one that's actually in-person complement to the Mentoring 365 called Mentoring 365 Live, which occurs at the AGU fall meetings. And if you haven't been to a fall meeting, which are usually in December, and they used to be all the time in San Francisco, but they're now moving around to different cities. This is an incredible meeting, usually with about 25 to 30,000 participants. And so Mentoring 365 Live matches you with experienced meeting attendees that can help you navigate the meeting and develop other professional skills. The mentoring network, which is part of the College of Fellows, is a really neat program. I participated in it for a couple of years, in the last couple of years. And so what they do is they pair 2 senior scientists like myself and 6 early career scientists. These are newly minted PhDs. And then we help them figure out opportunities and overcome obstacles. And we meet once a month for an hour with about 6 newly minted PhDs for a whole year. So it's and I've got to tell you, I'm friends with the 12 people that I've interacted with. I'm good friends with. In fact, next week I have a Zoom chat with Kevin Roach, who's now a faculty member at Boise State, just to kind of catch up. And this happens all the time with all of the mentees. Great mentoring program. So explore and imagine. I mean, being a research scientist is not the only option for a geoscientist. There are lots of different options, and there are lots of resources like the American Geosciences Institute. If you go to their webpage, you can see a lot of career guidance on their webpage. But there are lots of different opportunities for somebody with an undergraduate or graduate degree in geosciences. This is not a static set of professions. You can see the change in employment on the left for lots of different career paths. And also you can see the same thing by industry. Again, you can get this out of the American Geosciences Institute website. So I encourage you to, explore these resources, and also do some research on institutions, organizations that you'd be interested in working for. For example, the USGS has lots of opportunities for students and recent graduates. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through it, but you can see that there's a link there. USGS is pretty good and actually hires, more than 1,000 students a year. And there are all sorts of opportunities for volunteering and for internships and for things like postdocs. For graduate students, there's an NSF funded program that provides resources. And so I urge you to kind of explore that and get to know USGS. I mean, USGS is a real interesting science organization in that, it's the only non-regulatory federal agency we have that spans all the earth sciences. It's got national and international scope and responsibility, sort of boots on the ground and eyes in the sky. A lot of those disciplines have been, kind of siloed for a long time, but there's now an ongoing initiative to try to integrate our disciplines and also our national and regional assets. We do have science centers all over the place throughout the United States. And so you should explore those as potential opportunities. And there's just there's a lot of thinking going on right now on how to integrate and address, how to integrate disciplines and address the grand challenges in the environmental sciences. So there are always, these organizations are always putting out these white papers. And if you're really interested in what the future looks like, grab anything any report any white paper that starts out with grand challenges. And they're usually short enough. They're usually things that you can digest fairly quickly. For example, I helped lead a workshop in 2017 on grand challenges for integrated U.S. Geological Survey science. And we identified 4 grand challenges: natural resource security, societal risk from existing and emerging threats, smart infrastructure development, anticipatory science for changing landscape. And then this kind of overarching framework called EarthMap, which would integrate across disciplines and would have, would develop, data products and decision analysis to help solve some of society's biggest problems. That's actually kind of led to a new science strategy in USGS for the next decade, 2020 to 2030. I really encourage you to explore this. Kayla, is there a way of moving that? I can't do it, apparently. Yeah, well, it doesn't look like Ann.
You mean trying to get to a different window?
Or everybody who's on there, can they? Yeah, because I can't, for some reason, I can't move that. I can't move that window, so I'm having some trouble here. Okay, well, let me move on to the next one. So I'll just take a cut at one of these.
Yeah, and I want to add, like, you're running out of time. We have about 8 minutes left, but I know you have a couple more things to talk about, but I figure now would probably be a good time to start thinking about
yeah, I'm almost done.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah.
Sure.
So, I mean, for everybody, think about this grand challenge is going to affect us all. And it's the discussion of the day, right? Is how are we going to replace America's decaying infrastructure? And the, the world's also, behind on this. And so, we're going to spend trillions of dollars over the next couple of decades doing this. And so we need smart infrastructure. And I think earth science will play a major role. So there are going to be a lot of job opportunities associated with this. And so I want to stop here and end with something that's very important to me, and that is work-life balance. While doing all this work over the last few decades, I did it with a family, and also a fairly large extended family. That includes my mother and siblings, and my wife's mother and siblings, and grandkids and nephews, and I've put my best into it. I'm a family man, and so I always said to my students and postdocs and anybody who would listen, that you can't hug your reprints, and so you really have to learn soon in life how to balance work and life. Thank you.
Awesome. That was a great talk. Thank you so much. And so if we have any questions, which I can begin with one that was posted in the chat a little bit ago, but people keep thinking about it, and you can unmute once, to answer your question. So is the AGU mentoring program available to undergraduates too? Was the question posted by Jeffrey in the chat.
Yes, Jeffrey, did you say?
Yes.
Yeah, Jeffrey, yes. I mean, let's see, Mentoring 365 is available to undergraduate students and graduate students. The mentoring network is currently reserved for early career scientists who are transitioning from their PhDs and postdocs into professional positions. And there's a lot of talk right now, because it's been so successful, there's a lot of talk right now of trying to expand that program to graduate students. But we haven't gotten to the point of talking about expanding it to undergraduates.
Okay, but yeah, the 365, undergrads can be involved with that too.
Absolutely, and I would encourage you to do so. It's a great program. By the way, GSA, ESA, a lot of these professional societies are standing up mentoring programs. So explore those as well, not just AGU.
Of course, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
If anyone else wants to ask any questions. Okay, well, if no one's going to ask a question, I have one for you. So at this last slide, you were talking about a work-life balance. So what would you consider the hardest part of maintaining that balance with having a career and a family?
Well, I think it's time management, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's tempting sometimes to work, day and night, 24/7, 7 days a week, 30 days a month. It's easy to do it. And you get into those habits, particularly in graduate school, when you're working on a dissertation, and then it kind of becomes a little addictive. And so, I think that you have to have, you not only develop discipline in your work habits, but you develop disciplines in your life. So, in fact, one of the things that's really the hardest for me is to learn how to do nothing. And I'm still having, I'm almost 70, and I'm still having trouble learning that lesson. You need to find, ways to enjoy yourself, to take breaks. And also they're kind of funny ways to treat yourself when you're getting a lot of stuff done. When I was a graduate student, this is before the internet, I'm afraid. But when I was a graduate student, I would get a lot of stuff done, and then I would treat myself to a day at the science library, where I would go to the shelves and pick out all the journals that it had interesting titles. And then I would just pile them up on a table, and I would open them up, and then I would just read abstracts, look through the figures, see how people were packaging their science. And to tell you the truth, that was relaxing for me. It wasn't anything that I actually had to do, but I was treating myself to something that I considered fun. I'm pretty outdoorsy, so I spent a lot of time hiking. And also because I'm a natural historian, you know, I enjoy nature as a hobby. And so I encourage you to develop your own hobbies. And then as you start having partners and families, you know, you have to learn how to manage your time. And you have to learn how to manage your time, not only to attend to your family, and give them the quality time they deserve, but also investing in friendships. I mean, science is very social. There's a lot of social capital. And so you know, I talked about mentors, but somebody once said that one of the reasons that I had been extremely successful in my career was that I did just an amazing job of picking colleagues. and I learned a tremendous amount from my colleagues, but I was always kind of great friends with my colleagues. You know, it was a real scientific community. And, you know, we might have worked, you know, 30, 40 years ago on something, but we're still close friends and still keep up with each other. And I think that's really wonderful.
Yeah, it sounds like you built yourself a good safety net there.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll have to think about that. Okay, and I think we are out of time, but thank you all for joining and listening to the talk. And we'll see you all for the next career prep seminar on the 23rd. Thank you very much, Dr. Betancourt as well.
Thanks everybody for attending, and thanks for organizing. Marie, great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Yeah.
Very nice talk. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. Take care.